the property you guys loved might not work, and the property you loved might not work, and it might not all work for all of us.
I really like Coyote Pass, but
I don't know, we could go there and rent a year and go, hey, this place really sucks, let's go back, or whatever. I don't know what we would do. You're just not married to a place. It's like we go someplace,
Kody.
we choose to be there, we choose to stay,
and
right?
we choose to put roots down and we don't move in another 7 years. And he's sitting here like kind of going, oh, maybe, I don't know, we'll see what happens.
Hey friends, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is Wednesday, March 15th, 2024. What if I could tell you right now that there is proof that the property that the Brown family purchased was not only for a storyline, I mean, maybe it was for a storyline, but what if I could prove to you that the property was never going to be used for single family homes and would have never been allowed to be used for single family homes? What if I told you that the building that Janelle had plans drawn up for would have never been approved to be built by the county due to restrictions on the property? What if I told you that on this show, the family stated that they were able to have conditions of the trust and the deed removed from this property, and they were able to have it all removed so that they could move forward with this property? And what if I told you they never actually told you what these restrictions were? And they probably didn't tell you what the restrictions were because it might have changed what they were actually doing with this property, because it was never intended ever to be used for single family homes. And despite what they might have wanted to do, they were not able to do it. So I went and dove into property records. I did some deep diving into the property of Coyote Pass and looked at previous owners, deeds of trusts, and recorded documents on the property to verify if my initial gut reaction is true about this property, and it was conclusively confirmed through documents. So here's the situation. They bought a piece of property on Coyote Pass in 2018. This parcel had been subdivided by a company, Who LLC. Who LLC purchased this property in 2008 or 9. And this property had gone through numerous different owners with successive trust agreements getting changed with every single purchase. Every piece of property that's purchased has requirements that are ordinances through zoning through a county. There's also zoning ordinances through cities, and there's ordinances that have to be followed through the state. When an ordinance is placed, it's through the county, and you have to follow these ordinances and guidelines, and you cannot bypass them unless you go to the county and say, I want a conditional use permit, or I want you to change the zoning and request zoning ordinance changes. There's also conditions that can be placed on deeds by developers and owners that are sort of like HOAs, a homeowner association rules, and it's done by developers in order to keep a sense of consistency within the homes that are being built in a specific area, or structures that are being built in a specific area. So they might have guidelines on what you have to have on your stone, like if you have to have stone on your house, if you need to have a fence, if what your landscaping requirements are, how many trees you have to have. Those are HOA requirements. Sometimes in lieu of an HOA, they will add conditions to a trust or a deed of trust, which are restrictions placed on the deed that go from one owner to the next. So regardless of whether or not the seller wanted to have these conditions on the trust, they existed, and then they have to agree that when they sell the property, these conditions will go with them. Well, conditions can be removed and negotiated, and some conditions that the Browns wanted removed from the deed of trust helped them purchase the property, because had they not gotten these removed, they would have been eliminated right off the bat. The property that they were purchasing is in a Coconino zone. It's rural residential with a 2-acre minimum for the property. That's what the zoning code is. But for more than 20 years, the sellers of these properties and on the deed of trust, there had been a stipulation that anyone that purchased this property could not have ever claimed bankruptcy. And because of that, the Browns would have not been allowed to purchase this property because Kody, Mary, Janelle, and Christine had all declared bankruptcy. So in order for them to actually buy this property, they had to negotiate with the sellers that they had to state, we haven't declared bankruptcy in the last 7 years. The seller agreed to make that change to the deed of trust, and for that reason, they were actually able to buy the property. Another stipulation they were able to have removed from the trust agreement was that they provide copies of their tax returns and allow the seller to see their tax returns. I'm assuming they didn't want to have their tax returns viewed by the seller because they probably didn't want them to see anything that might be happening in these taxes that may or may not be legal. But previous owners and buyers had agreed to providing copies of their tax returns to the seller for purposes of the sale of the trust. So a couple stipulations right off the bat were removed by them. However, there was a stipulation that had been passed down for more than 20 years about the use of the land and the use of the land and a condition of the use of the land, and that sellers will not sell the land to anyone unless a buyer agrees that they will buy it for this purpose. And if they don't use it for that purpose, the original seller can come back at them and basically say, you lied about what you're going to use this property for. Sometimes these conditions can get removed, although they're hard to have removed, and some are upheld in court. In the specific case of Coyote Pass, for more than 20 years, there had been a stipulation on this property that despite the fact that it's zoned rural residential 2, that the property would not be used for primary homes, would not be used for single-family homes, but would instead be used for investment property or commercial use. When Kody and Robyn, Janelle and Kody, and Mary and Christine signed these deeds of trust with the seller, they told them, we will not use this property for anything other than investment property or for commercial use, meaning they were not going to build homes on this property that they would live on. And it likely had to do with the fact that there was going to be other people using the same piece of property with the intention of having it used as cabins. So Kody and the wives were never going to be able to build homes on that lot property that they could live on as their primary home, which is probably why Kody in 2019 had this wild hair up his ass and he decided he and Robyn had to buy a home that was $890,000, which made no sense to anyone that watched the show. Like, why would you spend $900,000 on a house when you literally have this piece of property over at Coyote Pass where you could build on? Well, now we know why. Because they never would have been able to build a primary residence on that property under the stipulations of the trust. They were unable to have that trust agreement removed, and they were unable to negotiate with the seller around that. And when they took and signed the warranty deeds, their special warranty deeds with the seller, they agreed that they would take forward all restrictions on the trust and the deed of trust as had been already established. So they agreed under the trust. They have signed a trust agreement that says, I agree that this is how this property is going to be used. I agree that this is how it's going to be managed. And I agree to every restriction that has been placed on this property, to legal documents that they agree to this. There's no way for them to get around it. Even once they paid off the loan and owned the property on their own. So they own the property, right? They have full rights to this property, but they don't have full rights to change the restrictions because they signed legal paperwork that said that they agreed to the restrictions when they bought it. They can't change the contract now. So the property was only ever supposed to be used for investments. What this means is that they either believed that they were going to be able to get around these restrictions and they could do it anyway, because that's what Kody tends to do, is he just doesn't care about the rules. They felt like maybe they'd be able to get around it with the county, which they never were able to get around, or they never intended to build there to live on. And I'm going to go with the fact as they needed to feel like they were going to purchase something. They needed a storyline for the show, so they purchased the property. But then once they got there, they ran into so many obstacles that they couldn't anticipate. And one being, they were never going to be able to build houses there that they could live in every single day as a primary residence. If they wanted to build a second home and a cabin, they could build a cabin there, but they couldn't build a primary residence. There's a lot of stipulations on these properties, not only on their deed, but also with the county. So another thing that came up in one of this past season was that Janelle had plans made for a casita, which is considered like a apartment on top of a car, of a garage. It's they're homes, but they're actually not homes. They're considered accessory buildings, basically. There are stipulations in the county that would prohibit her from actually building a home like that on her property. So the zoning in this area restricts people from having guest homes on the property unless there's already a primary unit. So she could build a casita, which is the apartment over the garage, only after a home has been built. And then even after that, it can only be a certain percentage of the square footage of the primary residence. But if they were just going to build an accessory building without having a home already on the property, it cannot have a kitchen and it can only have one bathroom and one sink. So it wouldn't be able to be livable in. You're not allowed to live in an accessory building on the property. They also have restrictions on this land for you cannot put a trailer on it. You can't put an RV on it. You can't live in a mobile home on it. And if you are going to use a fifth wheel, like what Janelle did, you have to get a conditional use permit, and you can only have it on the property for 100 days a year. And because they do not want people using this property for short term, or they don't want people parking RVs on the property and having the RV be the house. They want this to be an area that has structures, not temporary structures. And so they won't allow anyone that lives in an RV for 100 days to hook up to the city electricity. So there's ordinances that prevent her from hooking into the electrical system, which you heard her talk about, but she didn't really explain why. And it has to do with they don't want her to live there permanently, so they're not going to allow her to hook up to the electrical system. So she had to have her own electrical sources. And because they owned all of the properties together, she never would have been able to move it to each different parcel for 100 days because it's the same person moving it just one parcel over. She wanted to be able to do that, but they wouldn't allow her to do that. And she never renewed her permit after 100 days. And that RV is sitting in storage and she has a huge loan out against it. They made a lot of really bad choices with their finances with this move to Flagstaff. And a lot of it, I think, was driven around having storylines for the show and desperation to create storylines. And Janelle drawing up plans for the casita, people are like, well, why would she spend that money on it? She didn't probably have to spend the money on it. I'm sure it was an expense that they could expend out to TLC, basically as, I'm going to do a storyline that I'm going to build a casita, but we're never really going to build a casita. And I'm going to have plans drawn up, and then they can get reimbursed for having the plans drawn up because they're going to film it. So she created plans in a home under the expectation that she likely wouldn't ever be able to build because it would never be approved. And these plans were never submitted to the county. She never submitted permits to build on any of the parcels. She never submitted approval to have an exception to build this kind of property on the property. So it really never was anything at all. On the show, Janelle had alluded to the fact many times that Kody thought that he was going to become some sort of big property investor, real estate investor. And when they first moved to Flagstaff, he said that he might want to sell the property because property had increased so much. And then there was just discussion about dividing it into 5 lots, into 7 lots. And really he wants to do that because he had 14 acres and he needs a minimum of 2 acres. And he probably thought, oh, I can sell off 7 lots and create like a development, basically, little subdevelopment. But unfortunately, they have to be cabins and they cannot be in a primary residence. And also, because the property is completely undeveloped, it's really expensive for people to build there, more expensive than building on a parcel that already has water and already has electricity and all like sewer and water already all hooked up. They bought property under the assumption they were going to become investors. They pushed a storyline that they were going to build, or else they believed they were going to get around these exceptions, and they weren't able to. Kody couldn't afford to build, and when he got there, he realized how expensive it was to build, and he realized he wasn't going to be able to be a real estate investor. And yet, on the show, they continued to push the narrative that they were going to build homes, or Kody lied to them and told them they were going to still build homes. The women could very well be naive and not understand these restrictions, and because they grew up in a cult, don't believe they have to abide by the rules and they can do whatever they want because, you know, they believe that they only abide by God's rules. This area in this lot and these parcels are, one, not in a super desirable area. It's well out of town. It's not in a really high traffic area where people want to go to visit in Flagstaff. It's not necessarily right by the ski resorts. It really doesn't have a lot of allure because they bought the land that's in the meadow and it's kind of ugly. So they got a big egg when they bought this. They bought a lemon of property. And then they've fed this storyline for years under this belief that, you know, they're going to do all these things on it that they're never, ever were going to do. And they lied to the audiences about it for years. And you know who pushed this property the most? Do you know who wanted to buy this property? Was Robyn. So really, ultimately, this choice to buy this property was a choice by Robyn, because Robyn said in an episode she didn't care about the conditions, they would get around them, and God wanted them to live there. That's what she said. And she was pushing everyone towards this property. And maybe in a way she knew it was never going to work out because she knew there was all these stipulations and it was just going to be this huge game to keep people there under the expectation they were going to build. And then in 2019, they buy their house, even though there was tons of rentals on the market that would have met their needs at the time. And all building topics and discussions stopped. So ultimately what this turns out to be is a $880,000 scam that Kody and Robyn ran on the women, making them believe that they could build houses and making them believe they could get around restrictions because that's how they pitched it to them. They scammed the public about it. And then once there, they decimated people's income. They decimated their savings. They decimated the nest eggs and completely depleted them of money from Janelle and from Mary, putting them in places where they couldn't even buy their own homes, and all for a storyline, so they could profit off of it. And really it's a scam to viewers because they never built the houses. They never could build the houses. And the documents are right there. They all knew what they were signing. They all knew that this could never happen, and yet they did it anyway. But you better believe that I believe that Kody and Robyn were the ones driving this and driving them and forcing them to do this and telling them we're going and you're going to come regardless, and then manipulating them to pick property that they could never do anything with. And then Kody changes the game and is like, oh, I'm going to be an investor because that's what the property is for. It's for investment. So it's an $880,000 scam perpetuated on the women, perpetuated on the audiences, perpetuated on fans, viewers, and even on their own kids. And where are they today? They have a house. Janelle still doesn't have a house. Mary has a B&B and no real house of her own. And Christine's the only one that has any sort of security. All right, you guys, what are your thoughts about the scam? Do you think it was premeditated, or do you think it was just accidental foolery? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Click on the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, guys.